I set out for what I thought would be another routine hunting trip, just like the countless ones I've taken over the years in the dense forest near my cabin. The sun was sinking slowly below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, while long shadows began to stretch across the forest floor. I navigated deeper into the woods, where the familiar paths were bathed in the growing twilight. There was a sense of calm that usually accompanied these trips, a reassurance in the familiarity of the forest that had always felt like an extension of myself. But tonight, as darkness started to envelop the trees, I couldn't shake a slight unease that settled in the pit of my stomach. The forest, usually so vibrant with the sounds of life, seemed unusually quiet. The occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of a nightbird were the only sounds breaking the silence. I found my usual spot, a clearing that had served me well in the past. Setting up my hunting gear, I arranged everything with practiced precision. The routine was almost meditative, an act of patience that I'd come to enjoy. As I settled into place, I scanned the area with a keen eye, looking for any sign of game. The silence around me felt heavier than usual, the shadows longer and more imposing. I tried to push the feeling aside, focusing instead on the task at hand, waiting for the familiar thrill of spotting a target. As twilight fully enveloped the forest, the trees around me grew indistinct and shadowy, blending into the encroaching darkness. I was on high alert, my senses heightened, when a strange flicker of light caught my eye. It darted between the trees with a speed that seemed almost unnatural. My heart skipped a beat, racing at the sudden, unexpected sight. I quickly grabbed my flashlight, my hands trembling slightly as I tried to focus on the elusive light. The beam of my flashlight barely touched the moving glow, which was unnaturally bright and seemed to defy the darkness. It zipped through the trees with a speed that made it difficult to track. Determined to find the source, I pushed through the underbrush, each step making a soft crunch in the silence. I strained my eyes, trying to follow the path of the elusive light, feeling a mix of excitement and trepidation. The light continued to evade me, slipping through the shadows as I ventured deeper into the forest. The light vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving me swallowed by near-complete darkness. I stood frozen, my flashlight beam slicing through the thick blackness, but it revealed nothing. The eerie quiet that followed felt oppressive, a heavy blanket that muffled even the faintest sounds of the forest. Panic began to creep in, and I felt a cold sweat forming on my brow. My breaths came faster, each exhale visible in the chill air. I called out, my voice trembling as it echoed back at me, swallowed by the silence. "Hello? Is someone there?" I strained to hear any response, any sign that the light was not just a figment of my imagination. The forest around me was unnervingly still. The usual rustle of leaves, the distant call of a nightbird, all the sounds that had been my companions just moments ago were gone. I turned slowly, my flashlight beam moving in sweeping arcs, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious light or find some clue about what had just happened. But the darkness remained unyielding, the forest as silent as a tomb. With the light gone, the forest felt even more oppressive. The familiar trees and underbrush were now mere silhouettes, swallowed by an impenetrable darkness. I started to sense an intense, almost palpable feeling of being watched. It was a sensation that made my skin prickle and my heart pound faster. The quiet was no longer comforting, it was suffocating, as if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Fear gripped me tightly, a cold knot in my stomach. The darkness seemed to press in from all sides, thick and unyielding. Every little sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, was magnified in my heightened state of alertness. My flashlight beam, once a beacon of reassurance, now felt inadequate against the encroaching blackness. I fought to steady my breath and clear my mind. I had to get out of the forest. The sensation of being watched was overwhelming, and every rustle or shadow felt like a threat. I turned and began to make my way back to the cabin, moving quickly but carefully through the underbrush. Each step felt like a mile as I hurried through the darkened forest, constantly glancing over my shoulder, convinced that something or someone was following me. The oppressive silence only added to my growing sense of dread. Finally, I emerged from the trees, seeing the faint glow of my cabin's lights through the remaining gloom. I quickened my pace, stumbling slightly as I pushed through the last of the undergrowth. Once I was safely inside, I locked the door behind me, leaning against it as I tried to catch my breath. The cabin's warm light was a welcome relief, but the unsettling feeling of being watched lingered, leaving me on edge as I tried to shake off the night's eerie events. The path back to my cabin felt longer and more treacherous than ever before. With each step, the darkness seemed to close in tighter, and the familiar trail took on an alien, menacing quality. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made my heart race, and I became convinced that something was following me. My breaths came in sharp, erratic bursts, my mind spiraling into panic. I began to jog, driven by a desperate need to escape the unsettling feeling that clung to me. The forest, which I had known so well, now appeared distorted and hostile in the deepening night. The landmarks that once guided me now seemed twisted and threatening, adding to my growing sense of dread. I pushed myself harder, my legs burning as I stumbled over roots and branches in my frantic rush. My flashlight bobbed wildly in my hand, the beam barely piercing the oppressive darkness. I could hear my own pounding footsteps echoing in the silence, each sound amplifying my fear. I didn't dare look back, knowing that whatever was pursuing me would only feel more real if I saw it. All I could focus on was reaching the safety of the cabin as quickly as possible. The edge of the forest finally came into view, and the faint lights of my cabin sparkled in the distance, a distant promise of safety. But just as hope began to spark, I heard a distant, unsettling noise behind me. A low, grating sound that sent chills down my spine. It was as though whatever was watching me was drawing nearer, closing the gap with every passing second. Terror gripped me and I couldn't bring myself to look back. The fear of what might be there was too overwhelming. My vision was blurring with sweat and panic, and I stumbled several times, nearly losing my footing on the uneven ground. Every sound seemed magnified, every shadow more menacing. I forced myself to keep moving, pushing through the exhaustion and the paralyzing fear. My sole focus was on reaching the safety of my cabin. Each step was driven by the urgent need to escape whatever was lurking behind me. I could see the cabin's lights growing brighter, a beacon in the encroaching darkness, urging me to push through to the finish. I burst into the clearing where my cabin stands, the familiar structure finally within reach. With a surge of adrenaline, I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, my heart still pounding wildly. The cabin's solid walls felt like a sanctuary, a fortress against the terror I had just fled. Exhaustion and relief washed over me, my legs weak and trembling. Despite the safety of the cabin, the fear of what I had seen still clung to me. I turned on every light in the cabin, flooding the rooms with brightness in an attempt to dispel the lingering darkness and reassure myself. I sank into a chair by the window, my eyes fixed on the forest outside. The shadows were now just shadows, and the trees were just trees, but the image of that strange light and the unnerving sense of being watched remained vivid in my mind. I watched the edge of the forest, hoping against hope that I wouldn't see any sign of the strange light or any other unsettling movement. Each creak of the cabin or rustle of the wind seemed amplified in the silence, but I tried to calm my racing thoughts, reminding myself that I was safe, at least for now. The warmth and light of the cabin provided only temporary comfort. Despite the safety of my surroundings, my mind raced with questions and doubts. I kept replaying the events of the night over and over, trying to make sense of what I had seen. The strange, fast-moving light, the oppressive darkness, and the chilling sense of being watched were etched into my memory. Paranoia and doubt consumed me. I questioned whether my own eyes could be trusted. Had I imagined the light? Was it a trick of the shadows or a figment of my stressed mind? To seek answers, I meticulously examined my gear and flashlight, searching for any possible explanations for the mysterious light. Everything seemed in order, no malfunction or sign of tampering. Frustration mounted as I found no concrete answers. I resolved to return to the forest in the daylight to investigate further. The thought of facing the forest again, but this time with the sun overhead, offered a sliver of reassurance. I made a mental note to prepare for a thorough search and to uncover any clues that might explain the unsettling events of the night. The next morning, I returned to the forest, hoping that the clarity of daylight would bring some comfort and answers. The sun was bright, casting long shadows but also illuminating the path with a sense of normalcy that had been absent the night before. I retraced my steps to the area where I had seen the mysterious light. The forest looked completely different in the daylight, normal and tranquil. I scoured the ground, looking for any signs or evidence of what might have caused the unsettling experience. There were no unusual markings, no traces of disturbances, and no remnants of any kind of light source. While my fear had diminished somewhat, a lingering sense of unease remained. Everything seemed to be as it should be, but the previous night's events couldn't be easily dismissed. I took note of the surroundings, making sure to remember any unusual features or landmarks in case I needed to return. Despite my thorough search, I found nothing that could explain the strange light or the feeling of being watched. As I made my way back to the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, just beyond the edge of the forest, waiting in the shadows. ###. Chapter 10. Lingering Doubts. As I walked back to the cabin, the morning light did little to ease the lingering doubts that gnawed at me. The forest, now bathed in daylight, seemed benign and ordinary, a stark contrast to the terror of the previous night. The sun's warmth was a welcome change, but it did little to warm the cold knot of fear still lodged in my stomach. I kept replaying the events of the night in my mind. The strange, fast-moving light, the oppressive darkness, and the paralyzing sense of being watched were burned into my memory. Each time I tried to rationalize what I had experienced, the answers eluded me. Was it just my imagination running wild, fueled by the isolation and the encroaching darkness? Back at the cabin, I set about preparing a hot cup of coffee, hoping that the routine action would bring some semblance of normalcy. As the coffee brewed, I glanced out the window, my eyes searching the edge of the forest for any sign of the strange light. The trees stood still and unassuming, their branches gently swaying in the breeze. The daylight had transformed the forest into a place of quiet beauty, but my mind was still plagued by the shadows of the night. I decided to take a closer look at the forest edge from the safety of the cabin's porch. With a renewed sense of resolve, I scanned the tree line, looking for anything that might explain the previous night's events. There were no signs of disturbance, no unusual tracks or markings. The forest remained as it always had, unpredictable yet familiar. Despite the reassurance of daylight, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The fear of the unknown clung to me, refusing to let go. I resolved to stay vigilant and keep my wits about me, even as I tried to convince myself that the night's events were simply a figment of my imagination. The forest, now calm and peaceful, seemed to mock my unease, leaving me with more questions than answers. As the day wore on, I prepared to return to my routine, but the memory of the strange light and the oppressive darkness remained vivid. I knew that no matter how clear the daylight made everything seem, the experience had left an indelible mark on me. And though I hoped the forest held no further surprises, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking just out of sight, waiting for the cover of darkness to reveal itself once more.